Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making the audiobook series. Salahuddin al-Ayubi, Volume 2, The Establishment of the Ayyubid State. Start of Chapter 4, Part 1. The status of the scholars in the estimation of Salahuddin al-Ayubi. Salahuddin al-Ayubi realized that one of the means of achieving victory against the spread of Batini Shiism and the Crusader invasion was the presence of a God-fearing leadership. This is what could, by the grace of Allah, bring the Ummah towards its set goals with firm steps. He was fully convinced of the importance of having God-fearing scholars at the helm, for they were the heart and soul of the leadership. Salahuddin al-Ayubi realized that liberating and uniting lands was not merely a political or military action, rather it was much broader than that. It meant confronting the Batini, Rafidi Shiite madhab, which posed an internal danger and threatened the beliefs of the Ummah and the soundness of its religious commitment. And it also meant facing up to the conflict with the European Christian West. If the Ummah's character was not based on sound belief, their victories over their opponents would never be anything more than a partial, temporary achievement that would always be vulnerable to the ebb and flow of history, as always happens. What this situation required was not only external victories in battle or recapturing fortresses, rather it also required building an ummah that knew how to fight and how to preserve its ideology and its cultural character against loss and disintegration. Then every military element of political gain would increase the strength of the Muslim social structure, its confidence in its identity, and its cohesion, so that it would not crumble beneath a series of blows and thus cause years of toil and sweat to be wasted. Academic activity at the time of Salahuddin and his interest in scholars was in fact no more than a natural extension of the era of Nuruddin Mahmud, and it was never an intellectual luxury or a traditional activity of some sector of the state. Rather, it was deliberately aimed at laying the foundation for sound beliefs. The Ayyubids took an interest in the scholars and played a role in supporting the Sunni madhab. Salahuddin al-Ayubi based his belief on evidence by means of studying with sheikhs and senior scholars of jurisprudence, and through that he developed an understanding of what he needed to understand, so that when a discussion took place in his presence, he could comment on it even though he did not express himself like a faqih. He was keen to spend time alone with some of the scholars who were close to him and to read him some hadiths or fiqh, and he would sit with the scholars of jurisprudence when they sat as consultants in judiciary committees. We have seen above that he was very keen to listen to hadiths, and he would go to senior scholars of the hadiths and learn from them. Salahuddin was keen for his children to grow up respecting knowledge and scholars, so he would take them with him to lessons and make them study some religious books, so they grew up loving knowledge and respecting scholars. Salahuddin kept the scholars of the Zangid era close to him, and he honored them and cooperated with them. The wazirs and emirs in his state were senior scholars, one of the most famous of whom was his wazir, scribe and consultant, al-Qadi al-Fadil Abdurrahman ibn Ali, of whom Salahuddin said, "I did not conquer any land by my sword, rather it was by the advice of al-Qadi al-Fadil." Al-Qadi al-Fadil combined deep piety with his political acumen. He prayed, fasted, and read the Quran a great deal. He was humble, often visited the sick, and treated the poor kindly. There follows a biography of some of the most important scholars and a discussion of the scholar's role in politics, academic life, jihad, and education at the time of Salahuddin. Al-Qadi al-Fadil, the Imam and great and eloquent scholar, al-Qadi al-Fadil Muhyiddin, the master of the eloquent, Abu Ali Abdurrahman ibn Ali ibn al-Hasan al-Asqalani, head of Salahuddin's chancery, was born in 529 Hijri. In middle age he learned from Abu Tahir as-Salafi, Abu Muhammad al-Uthmani, Abu Qasim ibn Asakir, Abu Tahir ibn Auf, and Uthman ibn Faraj al-Abdari. Al-Qadi al-Fadil attained a high level of skill in writing rhymed prose, an art in which he had a brilliant touch and produced creative meanings. He attained a level of prominence which no one else could match, and in which no one could compete with him, although there were many active in that field. He learnt this skill from al-Muwaffaq Yusuf ibn al-Khalal, the head of al-Adid's chancery. Then he served on the border for a while. Then his services were requested by the son of as-Salih ibn Ruzik, who employed him in the chancery. Al-Imad said, "He died as a good Muslim, not leaving any righteous deed but he did it, and not having entered any covenant but he fulfilled it. His great accomplishments in freeing prisoners and establishing endowments cannot be listed, especially the endowments he established for freeing prisoners. He supported the Malikis and Shafa'is by establishing schools, and he helped orphans by establishing schools for teaching the Quran. He restored people's rights, and was ahead in doing righteous deeds. The Sultan was obedient to him, and lands were not conquered except because of his good advice and opinion. I am one of his good deeds. His writings were as effective and powerful as mighty battalions. His pen was the jewel of the age. His intelligence was used for righteous purposes. His words were highly effective, literally, could undo the knots of witchcraft. His eloquence lent perfection to the state, and gave the era of Salahuddin precedence over others, surpassing the styles of the ancients. I never found him repeating a supplication in any letter that he wrote, and he never repeated a word when speaking to people. He said of him in his book Al-Kharidah, "Before I mention the prominent people of Egypt, I will start by mentioning one compared to whom all the prominent people of Egypt are no more than a drop in the ocean, Al-Qadi al-Fadil. He is like the Sharia of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam that abrogated all laws that came before. He is the author of creative ideas. He is the one whose ideas represent the foundation of the state. What he produces in one day, if it were written down, would be the best help to people in that field. Where is a poet in comparison to his eloquence? Where is Qais in comparison to his wisdom? Where are Hatim and Amr in comparison to his tolerance and zeal? He does not remind others of his favors when he does good deeds, or waffle when he speaks. He is a man of honesty, chivalry, and purity, one of the close friends of Allah who are singled out for honor. Despite the overwhelming circumstances, he does not neglect supererogatory prayers or the people to whom he gives on a regular basis. Al-Hafiz al-Munziri said concerning him, "The Sultan trusted him completely and held him in high esteem. He was very righteous and did a lot of good deeds." Al-Muwaffaq Abdul Latif said, "Al-Qadi al-Fadil loved writing and books. He was religiously committed, dignified, persistently recited the supplications for morning and evening, and read Quran. When Asad ad-Din came to power, he summoned him and admired him. Then Salahuddin made him one of his inner circle. He did not occupy himself with physical pleasures. He did a lot of good deeds and always prayed night prayers. He took an interest in tafsir and literature, and took less of an interest in grammar, although he was good at it. His writing of official letters was unparalleled. Ibn Sina al-Mulk mentioned that what he wrote filled 22 volumes. Ibn Qatan mentioned that it was 20 volumes. He was abstemious in his food, physical pleasures, and clothing. He wore white clothes. He often attended funerals and visited the sick, and he did charitable deeds secretly and openly. He was physically weak, with a gentle image, and he had a hunchback that he covered with his tailasan, that is a shawl-like garment. He was hot-tempered, but he suppressed it, and did not harm anyone. He showed kindness to people of knowledge, and treated them gently. He did not take revenge on his enemies except by showing them kindness or turning away from them. His annual income was approximately 50,000 dinars, apart from trade with India and the Maghrib. He died of a heart attack when he needed that most, when things got very bad, which indicates that Allah cared for him. Abu Shammah said concerning him, "He was a wise and mature, respected by the Sultan Salahaddin, who asked for his opinion and consulted him at times of turmoil. The Sultan obeyed him and did not conquer any region, except on the basis of his opinion. His writings were a means that led to victory. As Qadi al-Fadil was appointed to many posts, and contributed to many achievements at the time of Salahuddin, including the following. Head of the Chancery. When Salahuddin was the vizier of the Fatimid state in Egypt, he was regarded as the Sultan and was called as such. When al-Qadi al-Fadil was appointed as head of the Chancery, he was regarded as his vizier. Al-Qadi al-Fadil continued to work in the Chancery as its head, even though he kept the title of deputy head of the Chancery, out of respect to his teacher, sponsor, and superior, Sheikh al-Muwaffaq Abul Hajjaj Yusuf ibn al-Khalal. He never made Ibn al-Khalal feel that he had taken his place, even though Ibn Khalal may have liked that because of his respect and fondness for al-Qadi al-Fadil, and his liking for continuity in style and ideas. He was not disappointed in his student, who treated him towards the end of his life as a righteous son treats his father. His position as head of the Chancery was the highest position that he was hoping for. After a conflict that had lasted for 21 years in Egypt, in which he went through all kinds of suffering, he reached a position that some of the scribes had tried to prevent him from reaching. After reaching this position, he became known as As-Sayyid al-Ajal, that is the most respected master, and As-Shaykh al-Ajal, that is the most respected sheikh. Katib al-Dast al-Sharif, that is the scribe of the noble council, and Sahib Diwan al-Insha, that is the head of the chancery. However, most often he was called al-Qadi al-Fadil, that is the virtuous judge, a title by which he became better known than by his original name of Abdurrahim al-Baysani al-Asqalani, which was indicative of his homeland and birthplace, especially in writings about him. Al-Qadi al-Fadil took charge of the chancery in Egypt, despite the presence of scribes, who were older than him and whom he had met when he first entered the chancery as a student, and had trained under some of them, such as al-Qadi al-Atir ibn Bayan. Then he worked with them and left ahead of them when he was promoted, whilst they remained where they were, which provoked some of them against him. It is clear that al-Qadi al-Fadil's energetic character, ability to adapt, keen intelligence, and strong intuition which helped him to recognize strengths and weaknesses in leaders were among the factors that led to his rapid promotion. but his beautiful literary style opened up horizons for him, which is indicative of the importance of literature in politics and the appreciation that statesmen at that time had for literature and literary figures, and their sponsorship for those who were talented. As soon as al-Qadi al-Fadil became head of the chancery, he started to work with Salahuddin to make gradual preparations for putting an end to the Fatimid state. The first step they took in that direction was the preparation of an Ayyubid army to implement the plan of revolt. Al-Qadi al-Fadil and the army of Salahuddin. As soon as he was appointed as Wazir, Salahuddin started working to prepare an Ayyubid army that would form the nucleus of a new Egyptian army to defend Egypt against crusader invasion. The deterioration of the Fatimid army was no secret to him, because he had encountered it during his 3 journeys to Egypt between 559 Hijri and 564 Hijri, and he knew it very well with regard to its human, financial, and military resources, and with regard to its organization and its battalions, which were formed on the basis of ethnicity, such as the Sudanese, Armenians, Egyptians, Dailam, Turks, and Bedouins. He knew the situation of each of these battalions in detail. Al-Qadi al-Fadil worked as an administrator of these forces at the time of Raziq ibn al-Saleh, and he took part with them in some of their battles during the Second Syrian Frankish campaign against Egypt, and he saw the leaders of the different battalions when they were competing for power, which exhausted the forces and weakened Egypt to the point where it became incapable of defending its independence or even of surviving. Al-Qadi al-Fadil knew many of the Egyptian forces through his work with them in the military department and in the chancery which dealt with the military department, and he supervised the spies and messengers. Hence he was very knowledgeable about them. He knew their secrets and had information on each battalion and its commander. He did not withhold this information from Salahuddin. Rather, he advised him on the organization and administration of his Ayyubid army, and throughout the period in which he worked with Salahuddin, he supervised his troops and watched over their preparation, organization, and financial resources. He accompanied them from Egypt to Syria to fight alongside Salahuddin, and from Syria to Egypt to prepare for coming campaigns against the Franks. Although al-Qadi al-Fadil was the head of the chancery and the vizier of Salahuddin's state, he was aware of everything, great and small, that had to do with the army, because of the connection between the chancery and the military department. He took part in preparing war plans, supervising the financing of the army and fleet and their supplies, and preparing them for jihad. He continued with these responsibilities throughout the period during which he worked with Salahuddin. Al-Qadi al-Fadil, ending Fatimid opposition. Al-Qadi al-Fadil based his political maneuvers when Salahuddin first became vizier on his experiences in the Fatimid palaces, in the army, and with the viziers and administrators. He realized that these institutions and their personnel formed a den of never-ending conspiracies and a source of ceaseless plotting. He had witnessed all of that and dealt with it before. He was also certain that they would not hesitate to seek help from the Franks, despite all the disasters and calamities that had befallen the Egyptian people before, in order to hold on to their power, especially if they thought that the rule of Salahuddin or of the Ayyubid sultans in general represented a danger to them. Therefore, as soon as Salahuddin gave him full responsibility in administration, he began to plant spies among these institutions, groups and individuals whom he recognized and whose evil he feared. These institutions and groups, for their part, started planning to put an end to Salahuddin's rule. The confidant of the Caliph was the leader of these groups. He started his activities as soon as Salahuddin was appointed. Uncovering the conspiracy was one of the responsibilities of the chancery, and in particular of al-Qadi al-Fadil, who continued to keep an eye on the chancery scribes, especially those who had been dismissed. The efforts of Qazi al-Fadil played a role in the uncovering of the conspiracy, headed by the Caliph's confidant, and he put an end to it. Salahuddin broke the power of the Armenians, who were second to the Sudanese in strength and numbers. He burned a building belonging to the Armenians between the two palaces, in which there was a large number of Armenian troops, most of whom were archers who had government salaries. They were the ones who had tried to impede the movements of Salahuddin's forces during the battle with the Sudanese by shooting their arrows, so they got their just deserts. Those who survived were banished to Upper Egypt by Salahuddin. Fatimid power was weakened, indeed broken, within the first 5 months of Salahuddin being appointed as vizier. That was followed by 2 years in which the Egyptian administration was changed and became a new Sunni Ayyubid administration. Al-Qadi al-Fadil played a role in this change, which paved the way for Salahuddin to become the absolute ruler in Egypt. For al-Qadi al-Fadil to be appointed as the vizier of Salahuddin, and for an end to be put to the Fatimid Caliphate. Reorganization of the administration in Egypt. Al-Qadi al-Fadil started to implement his plan to topple the Fatimid system by getting rid of the department heads and scribes who were loyal to the Fatimids. Because of his work in the departments, he knew the men of state, heads of departments, and scribes, and their political affiliations and sectarian inclinations. He was on friendly terms with some, regarded others as enemies, and was in competition with still others. He had the opportunity to get rid of whoever he could, and he did just that. He got rid of a large number of Ismaili Shiites, Christian and Jewish scribes and others, fearing that they might conspire with the Fatimid remnants, or make contact with the Franks in the name of the departments in which they were working. He referred to the danger posed by these scribes in more than one official letter to the Abbasid Caliph and to Nuruddin. In one of the letters, he wrote on behalf of Salahuddin to the Caliph al-Mustadi. He described the situation of Egypt under the Fatimids by saying, "The Fatimids have inner circles, whose members frequent their palaces, some of whom are calling the people in crafty ways to misguidance, and making the people incline towards them. Some of them are scribes, whose pens are like poison." His suspicions were proven to be true later on, when these scribes started plotting and conspiring to topple Salahuddin, as he dismissed the scribes and administrators, whose loyalty he doubted. He kept those of whose loyalty he was certain, and those whose administrative skills, information, and help he needed to implement the plans for revolt. Foremost among whom was al-Khatir ibn Mamati, the head of the military department, and one of the friends of al-Qadi al-Fadil. Ibn Mamati had served in the military department at the time of Shawir, and had become a Sunni at the hands of Asad ad-Din Shirkuh. He remained close to al-Qadi al-Fadil, and loved him until his death in 578 Hijri. After he died, his son al-Asad ibn Mamati was appointed in charge of the department. Al-Asad was as loyal as his father to al-Qadi al-Fadil, who relied on his administrative skills and loyalty during his absence from Egypt. Al-Qadi al-Fadil also took care of al-Atir ibn Bayan, the head of the Office of Governmental Oversight, and kept him in his post. He was also Sunni. This Ibn Bayan was older than al-Qadi al-Fadil. He had been working in the chancery when al-Qadi al-Fadil entered it, seeking knowledge in it, and he had defended him when he returned from Alexandria to Cairo. Al-Qadi al-Fadil continued to work with Ibn Bayan and rely on him, and when Ibn Bayan grew old and was no longer able to work, al-Qadi al-Fadil allocated him a pension to help him. He also kept al-Hasan al-Makhzumi, who was a Sunni, as the head of the royal court. He himself remained as head of the chancery in addition to his general administrative role as vizier. He started directing these departments to serve the aims of Salahaddin and his state, and his great Islamic project. Al-Qadi al-Fadil and the Sunni revival in Egypt. Alexandria was a center for the Sunni revival in Egypt. This was achieved at the hands of the scholars who came there from the Maghrib, such as Abu Bakr at-Tartushi, and from the east, such as as-Salafi. They founded schools in the city which had a great impact on the Sunni revival and on the Jihad movement against the Franks. This explains the support of the people of Alexandria for Asad ad-Din and Salahaddin. As for Cairo, it was not blessed with schools and Sunni scholars of jurisprudence like Alexandria. But that situation changed with the appearance of Salahaddin on the political stage. Even though Nuruddin and Asad ad-Din benefited from some of the Sunnis before Salahaddin became vizier in getting popular support for their movement within Egypt, these elements on their own were not sufficient. There was a need for a cultural revolution in Egypt through which the country could gradually be brought back to the Sunni madhab. Salahaddin began his reforms in Egypt even before dealing the final blow to the Fatimids by establishing a number of schools for the four madhabs, the first of which was built for the Shafa'is on the ruins of Al-Ma'una jail, where many of the leaders of Egypt had been kept, in 566 Hijri, that is 1170 or 1171 Common Era. It was perhaps the first school of its type in Egypt. In 566 Hijri, that is 1170 Common Era, he also founded a school for the Malikis next to the mosque of Amr ibn al-As, which was known as Al-Qamhiyya. Taqiyuddin Umar ibn Shahinshah ibn Ayyub, Salahaddin's nephew, founded a school for the Shafa'is and established a number of places as endowments to support it. These schools were the beginning of a Sunni school building movement, in which many of the Ayyubids and their emirs took part during Salahaddin's rule in Egypt later on. Al-Qadi al-Fadil also took part in it, by building one of the most prosperous of these schools, where he kept a large number of the Fatimids' treasury of books. The idea of building Sunni schools was imported from Syria, along similar lines to what Nuruddin had done there of establishing schools with similar curricula and subjects to those which were taught in the Nizami schools in Baghdad. Financing these schools and selecting teachers for them were the responsibilities of al-Qadi al-Fadil. Among the administrative reforms that were introduced during the viziership of Salahaddin was the separation of the Fatimid Department of Endowments, which supervised and financed religious institutions, from the Department of Finance. It was made into a separate department under the direct administration of the vizier, namely Salahaddin, before the fall of the Fatimids, and it came under the direct supervision of al-Qadi al-Fadil after their fall. After that, he was primarily responsible for the administration of these important institutions and for selecting teachers, scholars of the Quran and the Hadith, preachers and imams for them. These were all means of change. It is well known that Salahaddin relied on the experience of al-Qadi al-Fadil in selecting people for these roles when he was in Egypt, and he continued to do so after he moved to Syria, as he consulted him on religious and educational matters. After Salahaddin had prepared the Egyptians for the revolt and clipped the wings of the Fatimid institutions, as we have seen, he began to prepare to put a final end to the symbols of the Fatimid Caliphate. In 565 Hijri, that is 1169 Common Era, he abolished the altered form of the Adhan that contained the words Hayya al-Khair al-Amal, Muhammad wa Ali Khair al-Bashar. Come to good deeds, Muhammad and Ali are the best of humankind. Al-Makrizi commented that this was the first change that was introduced to the state. Then after that, he ordered on Friday 10th Dhul-Hijjah 565 Hijri, that is 1170 Common Era, that the rightly guided caliphs be mentioned in the Friday khutbah, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali, radiyallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in. After that, he ordered that al-Adid be mentioned in the khutbah in ambiguous terms, so as to confuse the Shiites. So the Khatib would say, O Allah, guide the supporter, that is al-Adid, to your religion. He appointed as Qadi in Cairo the Faqih Isa al-Hakari, who was a Kurd and one of the closest people to Salahaddin. He did this as a first step towards changing the people's loyalty in Cairo, most of the inhabitants of which were Ismailis. He dismissed the Shiite Qadis in Egypt, after which he captured the possessions of al-Adid and the palaces, which he handed over to al-Tawashi Bahad-Din Karakush al-Asadi, who took control of Egypt and began to watch everything that happened there, great or small, until the Caliph al-Adid was effectively placed under house arrest in his palace. At the beginning of 567 Hijri, that is 1171 or 1172 Common Era, Salahaddin issued orders stopping the sermons in the name of the Fatimids. This was also done gradually. On the first Friday of Muharram 567 Hijri, that is 1171 or 1172 Common Era, the name of al-Adid was omitted from the khutbah. On the second Friday, the khutbah was given in the name of the Caliph al-Mustadi bi Amrillah Abu Muhammad al-Hasan ibn al-Mustanjib Billah, and sermons were no longer given in the name of the Fatimids. Al-Adid died on 10th Muharram 567 Hijri, that is 1171 or 1172 Common Era. This Ashura was different from what the Egyptians were used to in terms of innovations and introduced by the leaders of the Fatimid state, such as heartbreaking speeches and moving eulogies for the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which provoked hatred by means of fabricated stories and blatant lies. The result of these innovative practices had been that they reviled the rightly guided and Umayyad caliphs. Then they would go to their homes to eat boiled corn, lentils, and other traditional dishes that the generations who came after them inherited from them, and which are known on Ashura even today. Then the next day they would start a new year in their lives, and their gaze was focused on their rulers. The Caliph used to hide away in his palace on Ashura, and in the forenoon the chief Qadi would ride, wearing special clothes, to the so-called shrine of al-Hussein. Then they would sit with the Quran reciters from the palace and the sermon givers, and the Wazir would come in at the head of the gathering, with the Qadi and head preacher beside him, and the readers would recite the Quran one by one, with everyone listening. As soon as they had finished reading, the poets, who were usually poets other than poets of the palace, would stand up and recite poetry that they had prepared for this special occasion. Their poems were eulogies for the Prophet's family. If the Wazir was a Rafidi, they would exaggerate, and if he was a Sunni, they would keep it short. They would continue like this for 3 hours, and after the Quran recitations and poems were finished, the envoys of the Caliph would come and summon them. The first to leave would be the Wazir. The chief judge, head preacher, and their entourage would go to the golden gate of the palace, where they would behold a scene different from that which they were used to. The valuable carpets had been rolled up and replaced with ordinary mats, and the gatekeeper was sitting, waiting for them. They would sit down, with the local dignitaries, scholars, and troops around them or beside them. The reciters would recite the Quran again, and the poets also repeated their performance, and the people present would weep again. Then food would be served to the mourners, nearly 1,000 dishes of lentils, savories, pickles, cheese, yogurt, honey, pies, and bread of which the color had deliberately been changed. At noon, the gatekeeper and the host of the dining hall would tell the people to come in and eat. The first ones to enter would be the chief Qadi and head preacher, and the gatekeeper would sit near them on behalf of the Wazir. Then whoever among the people wanted to eat would also enter. After the meal was finished, they would all leave the place, and the mourners would go around in Cairo. Merchants would close their shops until Asr, that is mid-afternoon, then they would open them. Now, however, life could return to normal after all these innovations. Al-Qadi al-Fadil often had taken part in these celebrations because of his work and his closeness to the Fatimid establishment, but this Ashura was different from what the Egyptians were used to. There was no chief Qadi and no head preacher because they had been dismissed. There were no poets or mourners going around in the streets of Cairo because the day had been prepared for another kind of celebration, which was the celebration of putting an end to these rituals, which the Egyptians had observed for more than 200 years, and putting an end to the caretakers of these rituals with all their symbols and concepts. Salahaddin did not go to the so-called shrine of al-Hussein, as was customary for the Wazir to do. Rather, he went to the mosque of Amr ibn al-As to pray, accompanied by a number of people from Syria and Egypt. After the prayer, he sat down, with al-Qadi al-Fadil nearby, and they spoke about what they had achieved since the previous Friday, when the Fatimid Caliphate had been abolished, and prayers for the Abbasid Caliph had been included in the khutbah. Then one of the soldiers rushed in, came to them, told them something and left. Salahaddin and al-Qadi al-Fadil looked at one another, and al-Qadi al-Fadil winked at him, and they both smiled with joy and relief. Salahaddin's expression quickly changed though, and he said, "If we had known that he, the Caliph al-Adid, was going to die on this day, we would not have annoyed him and omitted his name from the sermons." Al-Qadi al-Fadil laughed and replied, "O Master, if he knew that you would not erase his name from the sermons, he would not have died." Everyone present smiled at this word play between the Wazir Salahaddin and his scribe and adviser, which concluded the final page of the history of the Fatimid state. Al-Adid, the last of their caliphs, died on this day, the day of Ashura, in 567 Hijri, that is 1171 Common Era, the day of remembrance for the murder of al-Hussein ibn Ali, radiyallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in. Al-Qadi al-Fadil sees the end of the Fatimid state. The Egyptian historian al-Makrizi referred to the role played by al-Qadi al-Fadil in the revolt against the Fatimids. As he wrote, Salahaddin sought the help of Qazi al-Fadil in his plans to eradicate the Fatimid state, until he achieved what he wanted, so he made him his vizier and consultant. The phrase sought the help of points to the role that al-Qadi al-Fadil played in the implementation of Salahuddin's plan to put an end to the Fatimid state. Similarly, Salahuddin's choice of al-Qadi al-Fadil as his vizier was no more than an expression of his appreciation for the role that al-Qadi al-Fadil played in this critical plan and in laying the foundations for the Ayyubid state, which preceded this plan. It is also indicative of Salahuddin's clear acknowledgement of the role played by al-Qadi al-Fadil in toppling the Fatimids, and the importance of al-Qadi al-Fadil in the future plans of Salahuddin. Salahuddin continued to reap the benefits of choosing al-Qadi al-Fadil as his vizier until he died. The achievements of al-Qadi al-Fadil in the administration of Egypt from the time of Asad ad-Din and his words in his letters at the time of Salahuddin point to the important role he played in reinforcing the Sunni presence in Egypt. He strove hard, by means of a comprehensive Sunni plan, to put an end to the factors of religious division in the Muslim world, to protect Egypt against Frankish invasion, and to take back Palestine. The opportunity to achieve these goals became available with Salahuddin, and he hastened to achieve them. In Salahuddin, he saw a leader who was capable of saving Egypt from the Frankish danger on the one hand, and of rendering a great service to his Ummah on the other. This is why he put all his knowledge, experience, and administrative, literary, and poetic skills at Salahuddin's disposal, and with his help and cooperation, brought some measure of internal stability to Egypt, after the land and its people had suffered calamities and tribulations. Salahuddin realized that al-Qadi al-Fadil was a great man with a great mind and knowledge, and a great position, and that he was able to help him to reach his goals in Egypt with his ample resources. Thus the two men worked together, each in his own field, to achieve a great goal that they both felt should be achieved. Al-Qadi al-Fadil was a politician and a great statesman who combined the benefits of his political situation, flexibility, and political acumen with the great aim to which he devoted himself, no matter how long it would take to achieve it, and he took advantage of the winds of history when they began to blow. He believed that the way of Islam was the way of Ahl Sunnah, and that every other way led to nothing but disputes and loss of faith and strength. The land of Palestine was never absent from his mind, and when the opportunity came to take it back, and he was certain that Salahuddin was sincere in his jihad for it, then his resolve grew stronger and he prepared himself to take part. The route he chose for himself enabled him to reach a high position, and he became the vizier of Salahuddin, the second in command, and by doing so he achieved all that any politician would hope to achieve, by contributing to the plan and working hard, as well as achieving personal success on a high level. All of that is testimony to his many talents and high acumen. Al-Qadi al-Fadil was the official spokesman of Sultan Salahuddin at home and abroad. According to Ibn Kathir, he was dearer to him than his own family and children. The Sultan would point to his efforts and say, "Do not think that I have gained control of the land by means of your swords. Rather, it is by the pen of al-Fadil." Al-Qadi al-Fadil attained a high position in the state, and he was Salahuddin's right-hand man, as he made him his vizier and consultant. He did not decide about any issue except on the basis of the vizier's advice. He did not do anything except on the basis of the vizier's opinion, and he did not pass judgment in any case except on the basis of the vizier's understanding of the issue. The life of this well-versed scholar teaches us many lessons, including the following: not to isolate oneself from public affairs, to get involved in society and government, to strive to gain experience and skills, and the importance of achieving distinction in what one does, of adhering to the path of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, of cooperating with one's brethren in adhering to sound belief, and of using all one's abilities and potential to serve the Sunni mission. He selected people for Salahaddin of ideal Sunni character and drew up practical plans. He did not withhold any opinion, advice, or experience. The life of this man is also a lesson for understanding the aims of the Sharia, weighing up the pros and cons, and the rise and fall of states. We can also learn from him in his role as the thinker and great mufti in the state of Salahaddin, the importance of dealing with the ordinary Shiite masses on a basis of justice, loving goodness for them, not shedding their blood, and being keen to teach them. Force is only to be used against conspirators and militia groups, and with those with whom nothing will work except force. Al-Qadi, al-Fadil, and Jihad. Al-Qadi al-Fadil accompanied Salahaddin on all his campaigns in Syria. Then he stayed in Egypt to supervise its financial administration and to work on preparing the army and the fleet, after which he returned to Syria and stayed close to Salahaddin until his final illness and death, with al-Qadi ibn Shaddad in 589 Hijri, that is 1193 Common Era. There were some cases in which al-Qadi al-Fadil played a major role, and which confirmed his position and high status in Salahaddin's state. When the Sultan Salahaddin was camping in Marj al-Safar in Syria in 571 Hijri, that is 1176 Common Era, the crusaders asked him for a truce and he responded, because he had no choice, as there was a drought in Syria. Then he sent his army with al-Qadi al-Fadil to Egypt, so that the troops could rest on the one hand, and because he feared turmoil in Egypt during his absence on the other. Hence his sending the army with al-Qadi al-Fadil was a smart move, and an act of resolve, aimed at keeping order in the new territory. Moreover, al-Qadi al-Fadil was almost always with Sultan Salahaddin in his jihad, as may be confirmed by the letter that he sent to Sultan Salahaddin, apologizing for not joining him in his jihad against the crusaders at Harim in 573 Hijri, that is 1177 Common Era, because he wanted to perform Hajj. Ibn Wasil said, Al-Qadi al-Fadil stayed behind in Egypt with the intention of performing Hajj in the following year, and a letter from him reached the Sultan, in which he said, with regard to His Highness's regret for the passage of time without engaging in the obligation jihad, for which he left home, and the never-ending obstacles that he faced, His Highness's intention is sound. Isn't Allah aware of His slave? He will not ask the doer about the completion of his action, because that is beyond his control. But he will ask him about his intention, because this is what matters with regard to acts of obedience. And he will ask him about whether he did his utmost within his abilities. If His Highness is preparing all resources for jihad, and trying to remove all obstacles that may prevent him from reaching his goal, then he is in a state of constant obedience, and Allah has blessed him by making it lengthy. His Highness has the hope of achieving what he is trying to achieve at the decreed time, and the reward will be commensurated with hardships. Hajj is only regarded as great because of the effort involved and the difficulty entailed. If His Highness manages to accomplish great conquest in the first days, and to settle the matter between the polytheists and the Muslims, all the efforts of jihad will have come to an end, and the records of righteous deeds attained by watching and waiting will have been brought to a close. Al-Qadi al-Fadil, the man of letters. Al-Qadi al-Fadil was prominent during his lifetime as a man of letters, after whom a school of prose was named, which was known as Madrasat al-Qadi al-Fadil. This earned him lasting fame among the literati, and as a capable administrator whose administrative skills put him in the company of brilliant viziers, and as a man who devoted his life to serving the people with whom he came into contact, and in jihad to liberate the Muslim lands that had been forcefully occupied by foreign peoples. He played his many roles very well, to such an extent that historians regard him as the ideal man of his era. But many are confused by his literary style. Although it can be difficult to understand, it demonstrates that he was very well read and had a deep knowledge of literature, hadith, fiqh, and other branches of knowledge, as well as a deep understanding of the Quran. Al-Qadi al-Fadil possessed the largest library of his era. The historians sang its praises and extolled its contents, stating that it contained 100,000 volumes. How can this man or his era be described as one of literary decline? This man was not only an administrator and politician, he was also one of the great teachers of his age, who spent his retirement in teaching and educating the new generation. His literary style represented a third way of expression that was unique to the Arabic language, in addition to the two modes of expression that are common to other literatures, namely poetry and unrhymed prose. Arabic literary expression contains three modes, the first and oldest of which is poetry, which has its origins in the poetry of the times of ignorance, that is prior to the coming of Islam, and still flourishes today. The second mode is that of unrhymed prose, in which books of history, philosophy, fiqh, usul, tafsir, and other branches of knowledge mastered by the Arab and Muslim mind were written. The third mode is literary prose. In this category we find the literature of the maqamat and essays which go back to introduction of prose into Arabic literary expression, represented by Abd al-Hamid al-Khatib. At the time of al-Qadi al-Fadil and his contemporaries, this was the accepted style of expression, not only from the point of view of eloquence, but also from the point of view of emotional impact. The letters written by al-Qadi al-Fadil and his contemporaries were political and social statements, and maqamat which carried various meanings. What may eliminate any doubt with regard to the literary and linguistic standard of these essays is what they contain of references to literature, wise sayings, proverbs, the Prophet's hadiths and Quranic quotations, not to mention the imagery they use to describe current events. His call for unity after the death of Salahaddin. Al-Qadi al-Fadil held on to his influential status in the land after the death of Salahaddin. Al-Aziz Usman, ruler of Egypt, him and honored him, and took him as an advisor and consultant. Nonetheless, Al-Qadi al-Fadil did not show any willingness or eagerness to interfere in the affairs of state. He preferred to withdraw from the world of politics and devote the remaining years of his life to his school, al-Fadiliyah. Undoubtedly, his political withdrawal at this time was due to numerous reasons, including, with the death of Salahaddin, he had lost the man on whom he had pinned all his hopes, and during whose time he had reached a high position that no one else could dream of reaching. He had also devoted a large part of his life to advising and guiding him, giving him all he could of love and sincerity, until he could hardly bear to be away from him during his life. So how about after his death? He missed Salahaddin to such an extent that after Salahaddin died, al-Qadi al-Fadil lost interest in life, which was apparent in the number of letters that he wrote in which he expressed his wish to meet Salahaddin in the hereafter. We did not come to this world assuming that we would abide here forever with our loved ones, or that death would not visit us, even if it stayed away for a long time. If we missed our loved ones who have departed, days are the stages that bring us closer to them, and our breaths are the steps by means of which we come closer to them. Every day we are moving towards them. Every day we are coming closer. How can our grief not grow less when the distance is growing smaller? No occasion passed without remembering Salahuddin. If he saw his acquaintances, he would remember him. If he saw people around him, an image of Salahuddin would come to mind. In one of his letters, he said to Imad ad-Din, "Our consolation is the appointed day of meeting, which is the day of judgment. The night we meet is like Laylatul Qadr. What a good life he lived, and what a good death Allah granted him. If a man is thought highly of despite them, life and death, then for his highness both stages were good. His first life was good, and it is justifiable that hearts beat with love for him, and eyes weep for his loss." Al-Qadi al-Fadil was no longer the political engine of the state after the death of Salahuddin. The state was divided, and the work that he used to do at the time of Salahuddin was divided among several people, among whom were some of whose conduct he had not approved when he was in office, such as Safiuddin ibn Shukr, the Wazir of al-Malik al-Adil, and ad-Deen, the Wazir of al-Malik al-Afzal, who had tried to keep him away from his father's companions and consultants from the beginning. Al-Qadi al-Fadil realized that his career had ended with the death of Salahuddin, and expressed his feelings in letters to some friends. In one he said, "I am fed up with life. After having been like the eyes of the one whom I served, I have become like a speck in the eye. Most of life is filled with troubles, but the most burdensome of them is what comes at the end of life, when a man has little strength left." It may be said that the great dream to which Al-Qadi al-Fadil had devoted his life came to an end with the death of Salahuddin. The country that he had strived so long to unite and strengthen was divided among the sons of Salahuddin, who began to compete with one another, motivated by their own selfishness and forgetting the enemy, which was lying in wait on their borders. He started calling them to form alliances and tried to bridge the gaps between them. He did not let any occasion pass without reminding them of the necessity of uniting. He wrote to al-Malik al-Zahir, son of Salahuddin, to offer condolences on the death of his father and to reassure him. How things will turn out depends. If an agreement is reached, then you will have lost nothing but his noble self, Salahuddin. But if the outcome is otherwise, then that will be the least of future calamities, even though it is a great calamity. Al-Qadi al-Fadil also tried to bring about reconciliation between Al-Aziz Uthman ibn Salahuddin, the king of Egypt, and Al-Afzal ibn Salahuddin, the king of Syria. He tried to support Al-Adil Abu Bakr, the brother of Salahuddin, the oldest and most experienced of Salahuddin's relatives, so that he would stand as firmly against the crusader danger as his brother had done. In one of his letters, in 593 Hijri, that is 1196 Common Era, he wrote to him, "The new arrival of the accursed enemy near Beirut, and the danger they pose to the country makes every mother forget her child and brings distress and confusion to the people. Islam has a foothold today, but if it slips, then Islam itself will slip. It has ambition, but if it is weakened, victory will not be achieved. That foothold is the foothold of al-Adil, and that ambition is the ambition of Salahuddin. I adjure you by Allah to stand firm. Throw away your beds and stay up for the sake of Allah, for there is no time to sleep. Do not listen to what anyone is saying, and do not say who is for you or against you, or who came and who passed by. Rather think of yourself as Islam in its entirety, that is come out to fight polytheism. Think of yourselves as the shadow of Allah. If you think that way, nothing can erase the shadow of Allah. Be patient, for Allah is with the patient, and do not feel weak. Even though Salahaddin has passed away, Allah is the best supporter. It is no more than a swift battle, then things will become clear. It is just one night, then morning will come. It is the matter of trade, then you will see the profits. Then he saw some cities fall into Frankish hands again. So he began to feel sad when he saw the beads of the necklace that Salahaddin had put together beginning to fall apart. His despair and isolation increased, and the numerous sicknesses that al-Qadi al-Fadil had suffered had the effect of keeping him away from the political field, as he had a weak constitution and suffered from many illnesses. This is what had prevented him from participating in some campaigns when Salahaddin was alive, and in his letters there are many references to his sickness and weakness which grew worse after the death of Salahaddin. In one of his letters to his friend al-Imad al-Isfahani, he said, "Our master knows how the adult is when he loses his child, and how the weak, slow-moving person is when he is called to war. It is as if I did not know the nature of life except during these days, as if I came to this world knowing only that death would take me from it. I have been expecting the decree of Allah to come to me at night, when I am sleeping, or at mid-morning, when I am walking about." He also wrote to him in one of his letters describing his physical condition. "I did this mission whilst my feet were affected by gout, which led to them being wrapped up and painted yellow and black with ointment, lying on my side. There is nothing sound in me except my sickness, which is hale and hearty. When I am alone with the devil of disease, I scream." He wrote another letter to him in which he said, "As for my physical condition, do not ask in what bad shape I am. My joints are in pain, my teeth are wrapped in cloth, my gout is boiling. More is like less, more is like a stick in my shadow." He also described his pain at the end of his life to al-Imad by saying, "The attitude of young men, what do you know about it? It is like a raging fire. I have started to believe that withstanding hardship is better for me than going through the hardship of working for them. So I get hungry, but I do not say, 'Feed me.' I get thirsty, but I do not say, 'Give me something to drink.' I gestured with my hand to say, 'Move on,' and I stretched out my leg and said, 'Pull.'" His death. After all this physical pain and mental anguish, al-Qadi al-Fadil died on 6th Rabiul Awwal, 596 Hijri, that is 1199 Common Era. Imad ad-Din al-Isfahani said concerning the events of that year, eulogizing him, "The great calamity occurred, the disaster for virtuous people concerning both religious and worldly affairs, when al-Qadi al-Fadil departed this transient world for the hereafter in his house in Cairo. The night before he died, according to al-Isfahani, he was working in his school. He sat with the Faqih ibn Salama, the teacher of the school. He talked to some people, and all night he was seen to be more cheerful, smiling more and more outgoing. The gathering was pleasant, and the conversation lasted for a long time, and he went home in good physical shape and talkative. He said to his servant, "Prepare what I need to go to the washroom and tidy my room when I wake up." The servant came to wake him up before dawn, but al-Qadi al-Fadil did not respond to the servant's voice, and the latter did not realize that the approach of death was preventing him from talking, and that the certainty of purifying himself with the waters of al-Kawthar meant that he had no need to go to the washroom. His father came to him and found him calm and still, and he realized that the decree was about to come to pass. All that day, nothing was heard from him but a low moaning, which signaled that he had submitted to the will of Allah. Then he died blessed. Al-Isfahani commented on his death thus: "A praiseworthy martyr has died. The decree of Allah has come to pass. He had a good example in the master of the first and the last, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Even though he has passed away, he will live forever with those whose records are preserved in an inscribed book specifically devoted to the pious believers, because he did not leave in life any righteous deed but that he had done it. He did not leave any action that could take him to paradise, but that he had performed it well. His actions in ransoming prisoners and establishing endowments are too many to count, especially the endowments that he established for freeing Muslim prisoners until the day of reckoning. He helped Shafi'i and Maliki students by opening a school, and he helped orphans by opening a religious school, and by other charitable good deeds, which will keep running for a long time, and which will be like a second life for him until the day of resurrection, when all people will be resurrected. He was with the Sultan, meaning Salahaddin, may Allah have mercy on him, in every affair from beginning to end, from when he established his state until it ended. Salahaddin did not conquer any region except on his advice." End of part 1 of chapter 4.